Good morning.
Good morning again. I'm excited to be here, ladies, and I hope all you guys are good to see your smiling, beautiful faces. And I'm glad that we can have this conversation where we can come together and hopefully it will add value to someone's, life, or and they can think about, the information that we are sharing with them. First of all, I want to say welcome to everyone. We thank you for being here, and we are truly looking forward to this conversation. I want to also say that this is and Hearts of Women. I was going to say Empower Perspective. This is the Hearts of Women, powered by Empower Perspective, and we do this every third Saturday, and we look forward to this conversation. This conversation, we're going to be talking about mothers and daughters in our relationship. So I hope that this is something that piques your interest, and that you can share it with your friends who may be who have children or mothers and daughters. I think there's so many of us that apply to this conversation. And also want to give a disclaimer: this information that we are sharing is from our perspective, and also we're going to share some biblical perspectives as well. And everyone has there's opinions, there's facts, there's reality, and so we're going to talk about some of all of those things, right? And so we just want to make sure that that these are not absolutes, and we are learning and growing with you. So I wanted to make sure that I say that because it's important, and we want to learn together. So I'm going to do something that we don't usually do. If you could, for just like give me a 30-second intro for Dr. Lisa, Miss Nodella, if you don't mind, and Miss Adrian. Just want you to know who our panelists are, and I would appreciate them just giving us quick information about themselves, so you would know who they are as well. Dr. Lisa, if you don't mind going first. We can't hear you. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Yes, I certainly was. Okay. It's Saturday morning. No, um, I'm Lisa Dove Washington, and really, I like to say that my communication is my jam, is what I say. But I love to help people to learn how to communicate better. I am a podcaster, a crafter, because I love the craft. I love communicating. So I coach people on how to communicate better, so that we can all get along and understand each other. And I'm also a publisher and author.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lisa. Thank you. Miss Adrian, if you don't mind, then Miss Nodella.
Well, my name is Adrienne Waldauer, and I don't have all those auspicious titles like Dr. Lisa, but I think that I would love to say that I am the daughter of the Most High, and that's the most honorable title I could possibly hold. I'm also a daughter, a sister, and big auntie energy over here. And I just love the Lord, and I want to grow, and I know that I am learning and all the things. So professionally, I'm in finance and have been for the last almost 25 years. But I just love people, and I love the Lord, and I just want to grow and see other people grow.
Thank you so much, Miss Adrian. Miss Nodella.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you may be. My name is Nodella Sacagawea Jordan. I am an elder in the Lord's Church, which means that I am a minister. I am a published author. I have a women's ministry. And I just stay busy for the Lord, but I also get to be a part of this great community, the Hearts of Women. I just really appreciate the topic on today because I believe it is always relevant as we continue to repopulate the earth. So I'm looking forward to today's discussion.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you. And my name is Lisa Keys, and I am the host and I guess I don't want to say we work together, right? So I try to put the shows together, and we come up with some topics, and we want to make sure that we're having the discussions that are beneficial and that are kingdom minded. So a little bit about me. I just love the Lord. And I have a professional life as everyone else does. I'm in real estate, but the most important identity that I like to identify with is being a king, being a daughter of the King. So, and I'm thankful for us to come together and being a part of this community, Empowering Perspective community. So, thank you so much for joining. Just wanted to let you know a little bit about who we are. If you can take me off, just thank you so a little bit about who we are as we come together and we have these discussions, so that you will know a little bit about our community. And I'm going to say this up front, and I will say it again. You can go to Empowering Perspective. You can find us on YouTube, and also on Renewed Consideration is another YouTube channel where we have most of our information on. So I want to take this time now to tell you guys about the Livest chat that are so supportive, and that we could not do this without them. Thank you so much for being here this morning. And if I want to take a few minutes to speak their names: Crystal Everett, who keeps us all on track; Nick D, who's in the background and keeping us on track and helping us as well. Here's Divine Appointment. Thank you guys so much for being here. And our CEO, I'm gonna call him, and visionary for Empowering Perspective, Dwayne Dwyer. Thank you so much for helping us in all that we're doing as we are sharing. And I see the available man has showed up. Thank you so much for being and participating in the program. Don't go nowhere, because we're gonna ask you some questions. Thank you so much for being here. So, all right, guys, let's get to our very first question. All right. So, reflecting on your childhood, how did your mother communicate with you to nurture to communicate with you to nurture, respect, and understand? There's another part to this question because it was too long for me to put in there. If you don't mind putting the other part of the question up as well. Have you used or adopted those same communication methods with your own children, whether they were your sons or daughters? And you can probably put them up one more time so they can see the first part.
So for me, I grew up in a generation to where communication, unfortunately, was not a big thing in terms of, like, with my mom. And it's not just my mom, but again, the previous generations, there was just certain things that was communicated, but definitely there could have been more communication. I don't fault my parents at all. Why? Because they could only do what they knew to do. So that is one of my takeaways. I'm sorry. I hope y'all didn't hear the noise in the background. I'm on a main road. Um, so that's one of the main things that I took away from my relationship with my mother is to better communicate with my daughter. And in that, one thing that I said before is that as long as we are living, we are all growing, right? We are all still learning and developing. And so for me, that's all I can do is even while I was um, raising her up, I look back and realize, I did still end up repeating some of the mistakes my mother learned. But the great thing is that I recognized that and I picked up from there and began to correct it. So again, in my generation, in terms of communication, like the way me and my daughter talk today, we didn't have that. My daughter called me last night and we was on the phone for about a good hour or so. That's not the kind of communication I was brought up under. My parents' communication was they told you to clean your room or they told you to do this, and that was their way, of communication. There really wasn't a significant bonding. Actually, not until after I got married, then me and my mom, which was definitely the hand of God, where we began to have that open line of communication. And so I'm grateful, even though I didn't have it as a young girl, I'm still grateful that I got to have it, before she passed away.
Yeah, and I was just gonna so I think, and maybe that's why communication is my jam, I don't know, but my mother was a great communicator. Um she with my sister and I, she was always very open to conversations about how we were feeling about something, but she still gave us that cornerstone of respect. So we knew that you need to come correctly, but I'm open to listening to, what you have to say. And I think I carried that on, and maybe I have carried that on into my life even now. But with my children, I always wanted to have a conversation with them before there was any kind of instruction or direction or correction. We had conversations even as young, when my daughter was young, she's 36 now, but even when she was younger, we would go, as a single mom, we would go out to eat and we would talk about her day, and she was very open. And I think I've trained her to do that as well. Not on purpose. I mean, it's just kind of, I guess, the way your mom communicates with you. Sometimes you pass it down. And I think in this situation, I passed it down. So Camden, I can say my grandson is very open to conversation as well. So we're kind of talkers on this end. Now I can say the dynamic in the household with mom and father, my mother was the communicator. So I think I pulled from that and being able to just have a conversation. I think my only struggle with that, with my mother being open, was that everyone else isn't all the time. So when you go out into the world and you have these conversations, yes, your mom sits down and she listens to you, but that doesn't necessarily mean everybody else is open to that kind of communication. So that's kind of where my struggle came in. But I did pass that down to my children. So hopefully they will continue that route.
I think for me, my mother was a very direct woman. She just was very young when she got married and had her first set of children. And then here I come along. I'm a second generation kid, and she was almost 40. So her communication style switched with me. So where my older siblings are very direct, like she was, she kind of trained me the opposite way, and would say things like, listen to be heard from your heart. Nobody likes the taste of gall. You can't speak, negatively. And I think I've taken that communication style because I don't have children, just in my regular life. But the only drawback to that is I didn't learn boundaries when other people would talk to me in the same directness that she would would handle conversations, and it was a little bit of a system overload for me. So that's how communication was with me. And because she was older when she had me, and it was just me and her, and as she would call me all the time, the life-saving baby, she talked a lot. And she talked a lot about life experiences. And it wasn't until I got older she was teaching biblically, but just using very practical language about how to conduct myself, how to talk, and all those things. So that's how the communication style was between me and my mother. And I just try to use that same format when I'm talking to just anybody in general. But now having to find where that boundary lies when I don't get that same graceful, loving, or peaceful type of connection back. So that was my experience.
Okay. All right. So I was sitting here thinking as I was listening to everyone, and I hear some, some different environments, right, that we came up in. Mine is similar to Miss Nodella's environment, right? We're in the era where, you're seen, you're not heard, right? And so we grew up in that era, and then when I think about that, when you were, a young child, as you become a mother, you were like, okay, so I don't want to do things that way. I want to be able to do them a little bit different. And so because of that, even though you're doing them different, you don't still have a full understanding of what you're doing, right? We're just doing it to make sure. I'm speaking, from this experience, right? I'm doing it from a way that I thought was a little better. I'm listening based on my understanding of how I understood our communication, right? So the nurturing, and there were moments I can say that I can reflect on, and there were good moments, and then there were moments that I can reflect on that were not so good moments. Yet I'm so thankful for every last one of them, right? Because it helped me to continue to grow and to understand and to be able to communicate with my children and listen, as I was bringing them up. So I think that mine is pretty close to what Miss Nodella was saying, but there was nurturing, right? There were those moments where we made cakes together and talked and then you seen the examples as well. So those are some of the things that I want to always continue to move forward with my daughter and my children. And so I'm thankful for those times. And I'm sure, if anyone is in the chat, I'm pretty sure they can identify with some of these. Yeah. So my mom told me that the Bible said this, so you better not do it. That's good, Crystal. That's good. You know why? Because one of the things that I remember, right, is our parents telling us to do this, right? This is what you're supposed to do, or this, do not do this. So we had this, don't do this, but not why I shouldn't do it. And I know some people will say, well, your parents told you to do it. That means just don't do it, or do it, right? So then I began to understand that if my parents, if I'm just going to be transparent, if my mom would have said, well, don't do this because this is how it can affect you if you do it. This is why God is saying, don't do this. These are the instructions he gave us because this is how it can manifest in your life. I see my cousin. Thank you so much for participating. Michelle Payne. She said my mom was very direct, and my auntie was very direct. she was very direct. So I like the understanding now, right? That if anyone could identify where there's a time where you were given instructions, but you didn't quite know why, right? And you may have questioned it, why can't I do this? Or for me, it was like they just don't want me to have fun. When I think about that, when I was younger, they just told me to do this because they don't want me to have fun. Everybody else is doing it. So you're looking at what everybody else is doing, right? And you're like, well, I can't do it. They won't let me have fun. Why is my mom like this? Those were my thoughts, growing up. I understand, of course, much better now why, but those were some of my thoughts. So his divine appointment says, my mother communicated with us the best she knew how from the lens she was taught. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That I agree with that. I was having a conversation earlier this week, and I was saying that there was so much that I was beginning to learn, and God was taking the lenses that I was taught with, moving them, right? Moving those lenses and changing them. And I was like, if I knew, I could have done it a little bit better. And then the reality was the information was there, but I didn't know how to decipher the information. The word of God is what I'm referring to, because there's so many instructions in there for us, but I didn't know what. I read it several times, right, throughout my life, but until I begin to change my mind and focus completely on God and not just doing it as a practice, then that's when things begin to change. And so the information has always been there throughout generations, but it is always been our source, right? It's always been our source of information, but we did not lean on that information. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, for me, I grew up in a household where my mom was a non-practicing Jehovah's Witness, and I describe my father as borderline atheist, if not atheist. Never knew how that relationship worked out, on those two spectrums. So I did not grow up in a Christian environment. There was a church next door to where we live. So every now and again, I would pop in. But even though I didn't have a relationship as a child, hearing the other children talk about God always kept me in that place of curiosity of who is this God? And I remember, and most of y'all will remember, even in the chat, where we used to say, oh, God's going to strike you dead for lying. And me being who I was, I'm like, well, I want to know who this God is that he would strike me dead for lying. That was just who I was. And I'm still that curious person today, more seasoned and mature about it. But I didn't have that. However, again, to your point that you mentioned earlier, is that even though it may seem like I missed out as a youth, compared to other people who grew up, in the church, who grew up as a PK, I take that as everything happens for a reason, when it happens, why it happens, and where it happens. So I don't regret any of that personally. When I hear some of the stories, I'm like, they probably would have banned me from the church. And I'm being honest. That's, just my perspective because of how I was as a kid, because of some of the things that I heard. But being an adult, I didn't come into Christ until I was an adult. And it definitely has played a significant role in my life. But it also helps me to understand, going back to the mind of the parents at the time, even the church, we have to keep in mind that even what we saw back then and those who experienced, we have to keep in mind, if that's all they knew, that's all they knew. We can't do anything beyond what we know until we come into knowing something more. And again, this is why I love this podcast, because during this podcast, this is what we do. We're I consider myself in a learning environment.
Yeah, and I was just going to share. I love the fact that we all have different perspectives from a childhood in these questions that you're asking, as a mom, as having a daughter, or being an auntie, or whatever it is. Because I have always been in the church, whether it was my entire family, when my parents were together, or even once my parents divorced, I was still in church with my mom. So I always was in a space with my mother because she was great at communicating with the wise. So a lot of times, because we were experiencing church, of course, me as a child, her as mom, I had a lot of questions. We might sit in church and things were said, and then I would go home. On the ride home, we're talking about it, and I'm asking her, what does this mean? I still do it now. When I hear something and I kind of want her perspective on what does this mean, or what do they mean when they say this. So I always grew up like that. So it's kind of continued. And my children tend to come to me with the same questions on things where they experience it for themselves. But then if they have questions, they come, and I'm always open to the questions, because I was definitely inquisitive. So I'm happy for that. I think it kept me open to not only trying to understand it for myself, but also knowing that I could go back to her and say, hey, I didn't really understand what this meant, or this is what I experienced, or I heard this in church. What did they mean when they said that? So for me, the experience was I've always been able to ask questions, and she was always very responsive to at least helping me to understand what it meant. So I did get to ask the why, and that's helped me to just kind of question things and feel free to do so. Whereas, sometimes people don't really feel free to ask why, but I did have that growing up. You're on mute.
Adrian, and then we're going to get to our next question if you didn't have anything to add.
I was just going to say that I think for me, growing up being a second generation kid, as you were talking, Lisa, this kind of reminded me when you were saying how you couldn't do certain things, it just doesn't feel fair. So all of my friends, all of my friends' moms were my sisters' ages. They grew up with my sisters, and my mother was friends with their grandmothers. So you talk about not being able to do certain things, and my mother would tell me straight out to my face, they rookies in the game. I'm a pro at this. And then I just thought that was just crazy to say to your kid. But in retrospect or hindsight, I can see now, right, that she was able to keep me out of a lot of stuff. That just curiosity from being young and just naive and wanting to hang with the cool kids wouldn't allow, I couldn't do. And I was able to stay out of a lot of stuff. So I appreciate now, even though I thought she was the meanest woman in the world and she was just so old and she didn't understand what was going on, all those things, right? I appreciate that now, because now I understand that I didn't experience a lot of things. And I'm glad that I didn't experience a lot of things, because then it probably could have derailed the rest of how the trajectory of my life could have gone. But thank God that she was smart enough and wise enough and uncool enough of a mom to keep me away from a lot of other things.
You're on mute.
Well, one question in chat for Dr. Lisa, and I want her to answer it before we go to our next question. I didn't want to leave the question unanswered. Crystal was asking you a question.
Oh, is that asking why as an adult or a child? So, I mean, the questions are different, but absolutely, even as an adult, I will reach out to my mom if I'm reading the Bible or trying to understand a passage. I ask her, why does this read this way or this? So I still go back as an adult and talk to my mother. We have those conversations. So yes, as a child and as an adult, I still ask why about certain things to get her perspective. I do.
Okay, good. I see some great. You guys keep your comments coming in the chat. Thank you so much for your comments. I see some things. My Michelle Payne is bringing up, and I just want us to keep. And if you have any questions as from what we're talking about, please add them in the chat, and we will try to make sure we can get them up. It looks like we may have to do a part 2. We're only on question 1 on this one, so we're gonna go to the next question. Okay, so I thought this was a good question because it made me think about what does it mean to raise our daughters in the fear and knowledge of God? And I know Dr. Lisa touched on it a little bit. And Adrian, if you don't mind starting us off as a daughter, right? Being raised, and your perspective from that.
When I first read this question, I was like, Well, she told me to fear her. I knew that. But when I really started to kind of sit back and think about it, a lot of the lessons that I was taught were not to do certain things because she said don't do them. But as you get older and then you kind of understand what it means for fear and knowledge, it kind of took me to Ephesians 6, right? When it started talking about how you're supposed to raise your children. So I know we're talking about daughters now, right? But we're talking about continual love and teaching them in correction. So for me, that's what that means now. Like that I'm putting it from a biblical perspective. So continuously teaching and continuously correcting as you're, especially if you're talking about smaller, your children, like the ones that are really that independent, is continuously teaching them and correcting them. And that's the way that we know. When you start talking about raising your daughters in fear and knowledge. I also think that with that teaching, though, also leaving space for curiosity. I love the fact that Dr. Lisa said she's able to answer questions and ask questions and being able to get answers from your mom. So I think within the teaching, also leaving space for curiosity to be able to develop the mind of a young daughter and continuously teaching, even, past the age where you have to be the primary caretaker. I believe that's what it means to for the fear and knowledge portion.
Dr. Lisa or Miss Nodella?
Yes. So for me, I want to share that in this instance where it says fear, it doesn't mean fear as in afraid of. It's talking about reverential. So by the time I um, came into the faith or the way of the Lord, my daughter was about 7 years old at that point in time. And one of the things that um, I am truly grateful for is that through my example, my daughter grabbed hold of that. And I remember I had never been baptized. And so at this particular church where we had became members, I went to baptism class, new members class, and they talked about baptism. And again, my daughter was about 7, going on 8 years old at that point. And they asked me if I wanted to get baptized. I said yes. My daughter attended the class with me, and she asked if she can get baptized as well. And again, we know that the prior generation, they really did not permit children to get baptized because they felt they did not know what baptism was. But because my daughter went to the new beginners class with me, and because my daughter was in service with me, I was not the kind of mother that I went to church and left my daughter at home. That, she went with me, but she did develop her own desire to want to know God for herself. And so, today she's an ordained minister. She's also, have the gift of being a prophetess as well. But all that came because of that foundation. And, even to Lisa's point with her and her mom, even though my daughter's grown, she has her own children now, that door is always open to where my daughter will call me and ask me, certain things about scriptures. And even in part of our conversation last night, she had asked me a question and I began to share with her, not from my perspective, but from God's perspective. What does God have to say about this? So, I just want to leave with everybody that when I speak about even though it says, what does it mean to raise our daughters in the fear or the reverence and knowledge of the Lord? We talk about how we go from being that parenting to being that advisor, that counselor, that coach or mentor. And so when you start out with them young, it can be an easier transition from parenting going into, whatever that other role may be. And so for me, I'm grateful that I set a strong enough example before my daughter that even though as a child she got baptized, when she became of age, she decided she wanted to do her own thing. And I didn't say anything to her because she had that foundation, right? That scripture that says, train up a child in the way that he is to go. When he is old, he won't depart. And so I hold dear to that scripture because my daughter is probably one of, no doubt, of many children who, she went out and did her thing, but she knew she still had a place in God. And when that time came, she came back to the Lord, and she's been rolling ever since. So giving them that foundation, or giving my daughter specifically that foundation, has definitely helped her to where she is and who she is today in Christ.
Amen.
Yeah, I was just going to share, and I think that goes back to Sister Nodella tapped into it. That goes back into why I'm so grateful for being able to ask why, because anybody in the neighborhood could have told you my mother don't play. But she had that balance where you kind of knew we can have a conversation, but you're going to always respect who I am mom. And I think because of that, the way she raised me in that respect, I was able to go to her and see what her thoughts were, or share my thoughts on something. And then I instilled that in my daughter. So although she didn't always do exactly how I felt she should, I always took it back to, you know better. Also had to let her learn her own lessons and be open to the conversation once she realized, maybe she had made a mistake, or I didn't do that right. And it wasn't always as quick as I would like to have been, but she always found her way back, because the door, like you said, was always open to, let's have the conversation. So that's one of the reasons why when I talked to some of my friends and they weren't able to ask the why, because it was kind of like this, oh, you don't do that. But I'm really grateful for her being so open to having a conversation. Not that it was going to be my way, or that I couldn't get checked, but I always knew how to ask a question without being disrespectful to who I was asking. So that I'm actually especially grateful for, because I know that sometimes that can, kind of hinder you from, because I couldn't talk like that with every adult. Every adult in my life, that was not the rule. But for my mom, she was open to, well, let's talk about it. I might not like the answer, but I still got some kind of explanation if I was curious. So, but I was listening to what Sister Nodella was saying, and I appreciated how she shared about her daughter, because sometimes, you tell them, you share with them, you expose them, but then they got to do with that whatever they're going to do with it. And you just got to pray that they come on back around. It's just a hard seat to sit in and watch and wait.
I'm so glad you went there, Dr. Lisa. I'm so glad you went there. Because, as I was listening, I was thinking about how I was brought up. My cousin, she put in the chat how we lived in church. I mean, we were there all day. As a little girl, I began walking when we had one of those all-night services, and they would go in and tarry and pray. That's when I started walking, right? So I stayed in church. I was brought up in church, and we was there all the time, right? And so I know my mother was putting me in the environment. I know there was this exposure that I had. I know that I came into church and I did the things, I think I'm going to call them now, some of the religious practices that we did, in being in the church. And then there were some examples that I had, as well as how to conduct myself based on the examples that I saw for my mother. We were baptized when we were younger. All those things, right? That was a part of my upbringing. My mom kept us in church. We had to sing, we had to do something. There was something we were doing in church. But then when I go back and I think about, there's a term, not a term, but there is a bringing your child up in the way that they should go. And then I thought about the schoolmaster, which is in Galatians 3:22, I think around there, right? Where it talks about us raising our children up in the way that, and teaching them the foundation so that helps them to begin to have a relationship with God for themselves, as Ms. Nodella and Dr. Lisa talked about. And sometimes they will stray from it. I'm gonna give you a good example. As soon as I got married young, as soon as I got married, I was, I said, okay, now I'm free. I can do whatever I want to do now, because I had so many constraints on me as a child, right? So I was going to the club. I was making sure everything that I didn't get to do that I was getting ready to do. I was trying to beat, at that time, my husband to the club late. He get off and somebody got to watch the kids, somebody going to the club. So I went through that phase, right? But then there was always this thing where I was uncomfortable. I couldn't just freely do it. I thought I was going to be able to do it, but because of the foundation, I could not just freely go out there and just be enjoying myself. This conscious thought continued to come to me, right? Anytime I was in that environment, I know I wasn't supposed to be there. So it reminds me of the prodigal child and coming back, because you had this foundation, right? And it's been given to you. You've been taught. You don't know it. You know it in part. You don't know it fully. And that's the beautiful thing about us continuing to learn, continuing to seek, and continuing to ask these questions. Because if we ask, he'll give us the answer. And so, and then something you said, Dr. Lisa, sitting there and allowing them, right, to have the same experience that we had, that our mom was cringing like this, like, why they were taught, they were brought up well, why are they behaving this way, right? I put everything in them so they would not do this. But the important thing is, especially when we have our daughter, because I would tell my daughter, you can tell me anything, right? When she was a teenager. And she loved to shock people. She loved to shock me, right? So she would tell me things. I'd be like, she said, you said I can tell you, and then she would say that, right? So she was my child who liked to just, test the borders with me. I hope she's listening. And so she would do it. And she still does it today. So she was the one who would, because I said it, you can come to me and you can talk to me about anything. She did just that. But sometimes she did it because she wanted to be, mischievous. But, so I remember those times. And I think it's so important for us to be mindful that even as we have our children and they're being raised up and they're going through that process of rebellion, because that's what it was, that we can be their advisors if they come to us, they ask us questions. But we can't say, you're not supposed to do this, right? Because you know what you placed in them already. And so those are the things that's the time when we as mothers have to sit in that seat and pray for our children, not just our daughters, but for our children, right? For our sons and our daughters, because they all had the same experience. We're talking about daughters, but we're not leaving out our sons. So those are the experiences that we had to continue to be mindful of, because they had the same exact experience. So I just wanted to mention that. But I think it's so important for us to be transparent about our progression as well, because we were one of those, I could say for me, I was a prodigal child. So I had to come back and remember again as well. And of course, that was many years ago, yet it was still a process of me being in relationship with God that I went through, because it's not better on the other side, not to me. Okay. So we're going to go to the next question. All right. How did or do your strategies for raising and guiding a young child differ from those for a teenager or adolescents? What biblical principles can guide you through these different stages? I think I started it already with my daughter.
I was going to say, because since I don't have any children, I want to go first because I'm ready to learn. I it's big auntie energy over here, right? So I'm a really good auntie, y'all. And I have some sisters that have little kids, like under 10. when I'm dealing with, I'll take my nephew Kai. Kai is a very inquisitive, he's very smart, and he loves to like figure you out. You know, he's one of those kids that, you know, you see him in the corner and you speak to him and he's like, hi, but he's looking at you like, you know. And he figured out real quick that like she loves me, but she ain't playing with me, you know. So he'll test his mom, his dad, and I'll go, hey. And then he'll kind of like, you know, kind of pull back. So I say all that to say when I'm talking to Kai, I have to kind of get down on his level so that I'm like almost face to face with him. And even in correction, I whisper to him and I'm talking really, really soft. But when I watch him not listen to his parents, you know, I raise my voice just a little bit and it kind of shocks him a little bit. But he has the respect of me because he knows that Auntie loves him and she, you know, will do anything in the world for him, but she's just not getting ready to allow him to, you know, kind of run rampant. And so, but with that same sister, that's Kai. So Kai's 6. With my same sister, she has a 20-year-old, right? And so with Aiden, it's a little different because with Aiden, I have to give him the space to just communicate with me openly about whatever it is that he wants to talk about, and allow him to understand that, you know, what you're feeling or what you're experiencing is not unique. There's nothing new under the sun. But still giving him more guidance towards the principles of Christ, right? And just allowing him to talk to him, just that auntie nephew conversation, letting him know that I'm always available. This is really where you should be. But with instilling that, allowing him the space to take that information and figure it out. And even though I'm not a mom, it's still, even as an auntie, it's still like, oh, son, I wish you wouldn't do that. Oh, kid, I wish you wouldn't do that. But okay, we're here now. You know, we're here now. You know, and without judging him or condemning him or anything like that, just keeping that lines of communication open so that he can come to me in case he is too terrified to tell his mom or tell his dad. So I feel like in that space, that's kind of where I am with the guidance, the difference between that young child and the older child.
Yeah, I think I would share for me with the children. I'm trying to remember because it's just been a long time. My daughter's 36 years old, so my memory is not what it used to be. But my grandson kind of brings that back to me. Like, how am I handling him in these conversations? Because he's inquisitive as well. But what I did as a child as when my children were younger, was just kind of let them experience life with me in going to church and how I kind of showed up as an example of what you don't do. If they saw something when we were out that seemed to unnerve them or scare them or whatever it was, we had a conversation about what that was and what I felt you should do in these certain situations, that kind of thing. So I think as a child, I just had those kind of conversations. As they got older, as teenagers, then we talked a little deeper into why I'm saying what I'm saying to you, why I'm saying what I told you when you were a little younger. And then we didn't always kind of like open up the Bible, to just be very transparent. We didn't actually open up the Bible and relate it that way. But I talked about different things like the principle of just respecting your elders and just those kind of things to keep them on track for respect with your grandparent, your parents, all of those kind of things. I think I'm hoping I'm answering the question correctly, because I think about with Camden, and kids are going to try you and they come in and they think because you're Gigi and Lolo that I get to get away with some things that mommy and daddy would not have let me do. So I try to also instill that consistency, and that you are still going to, even if we're a little softer than your parents because we grandparents, it's only because we grandparents, which I'm not quite that soft. It's the same really, but I try to instill in him that you are still to respect your parents. It's your parents that give you the direction. You do not get to override it with me or Lolo, and that's how I continue it. So, I mean, those are some of the principles. I was really big on respect of adults, even though some of my friends felt like, oh, you can talk to your mom like that or whatever, and they immediately thought of it as, I'm not allowed to do that. So they saw it as disrespect sometimes, but I didn't see it that way, but it was because I was raised a little differently. So I hope that makes sense. But yeah, I kind of graduated to how I explained to them why I was saying what I was saying, and then the principles behind why we don't go out in the street and behave this way, or what this can lead to, that kind of thing. So those are the kind of conversations that I used in raising them.
So for me, again, even though I did not grow up in the church, I was fortunate to, even though my daughter was 7, she was still quite a few years away from being a teenager. And I really depended on God because I'd never had a child before, never had an adolescent before, never had a teenager before. And there was moments when I thought I was going to strangle that child. My daughter really is one of the best kids you could have, but there was just those moments from time to time I was ready to strangle her neck. For me, it was mostly through example. We say action speaks louder than words, right? Or the newer way of saying it is, I can show you better than I can tell you. And for me, that's really because me and my mom didn't have that line of communication. It was hard for me to also have that line of communication with her at times. So for me, being an example to her was the best thing that I could do, because sometimes parents would say one thing and do something totally different. So then you wonder why the child is indecisive and the child is all over the place. So for me, the best thing, and even when my sons came along, it was a little different with them. But I learned from my daughter. So my daughter was kind of that learning curve, if you will, by the time the boys came along. So I was able to communicate with them a little bit better. But then as she was growing older, because it's 10 years between her and the oldest boy, while my early years with her was teaching me how to be with them, but then they were also teaching me how to be with her because she was older. And even talking about this now just made me realize this. And so I just really ultimately, I prayed a lot, truthfully, because I'd never had a child before. I mean, I would reach out to my mom, and not that her advice wasn't good. It was just still, just certain things. It was like, okay, it was a God thing. It was just some things was a God thing that I had to take to God. And that's really how I made it through her being a young child, her being a teenager, an adolescent. And again, my daughter really overall, she really was a good kid. I really didn't get a lot of problems out of her, but there was those moments. But it wasn't until she was a teenager. So for me, that's how I, pretty much got through it. So I can't say that I had a strategy per se outside of prayer. That was really my ultimate go-to. Is I went in prayer, and the Spirit of God guided me that way. I don't have any specific scriptures that I can give you, but there's loads of them that I'm sure we can use.
Okay, good.
Lisa, can I clear up something real quick? I saw them.
Okay.
So, because I said Gigi and Lolo. Lolo is the nickname my husband has for granddad. So it's an actual nickname for granddad. Sometimes it's Lola and Lolo. He's Lolo because my daughter started it. She started calling him Lolo, and when I looked it up, it was a nickname for granddad. So it just stuck when he became a grandfather. So that's where that name came from, because he was so lost.
Well, that was in the chat. Okay. Giving clarity. So, as I thought about this, the first scripture that came to me was, train up a child in the way that they should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. That's the first scripture that came to me, right? And when I think about the difference in raising up a child, infants, you know, you have to give the examples. And I think the environment is so important, right? When you're bringing a child into the world, and you're and you've been given this gift to raise up, right? And then you're preparing them as progression goes. You're still preparing them. You're being the example. You may not get it, you know, completely right all the time, but like you said, Miss Nodella, you're praying, you're asking God for instructions on how to do this, but you know that you have this child and you have to raise them up, right? I didn't understand later that they were gifts from God. I didn't understand that until much later, that they were gifts. And then as they become adolescents or teenagers, this is when they're really observing, they're really watching, and they're paying attention to what you're doing, and it matters so much. And so when they come to you, I had written a note on this one because I thought it was so important, because when we begin to talk about teenagers, you know, there is mentorship happening in these moments, right? When we're mentoring them, they're coming to us and they're asking us questions. And sometimes the questions are not, we may not have an explanation for them, but we can find it. So when children become teenagers, they really begin to ask some questions, and you like, okay, so now I have to make sure that I can answer these questions, because, you know, they're going to come back to me again and I don't have the answer to it. So, I mean, that was my thought, right? But raising them up, right, and as a progression, then you're knowing that, and you're mentoring. And I didn't realize this really either, that you are mentoring them. They are watching you, right? Well, I think I knew it in part, but I know it a little bit more now, that they're watching you. They're asking you questions, and you are preparing them to leave from your authority and to go to God's authority. So if you don't equip them the way that they need to be equipped, then they're going to be in an environment, and the environment is going to do a job on them in the world, because they haven't had some instructions, and that's intentional as well, because that's a part of them being in relationship with God. They have to establish that for themselves. So I think in the teenage years is where you really have to make sure that you're being that example. Like, I have 2 teenage grandchildren, and the mom calls my daughter, calls me and talk to me about them all the time. And when I have an opportunity, they'll call and talk to me as well. So I think that is the example in preparation for them to go off. They're going off to college. How are they going to behave in college? What have I given them? What foundation have I given them? What is straying away a little? Yeah, they're most likely they may. And so I think when you are transitioning, you're raising them up, and you're being a gift, and you're nurturing them, and you're training them from a baby, and then they transition to teenage. That is the most, I think, foundational years before they go out on their own. So when I think about the insight in the scriptures that I can use, I know most of it is prayer and being a good example and giving them some sound advice. Those are the things that can help them be better. I'm going to say kingdom citizens, but they're in the world. I'm going to say that. So those are that is my response to that question. And I really took some time to consider it, because I think that's one of the most important transitions for young children and, adolescents and teenagers. Okay, we can go to the next question. If no one else had anything else to add to that. Okay, so we are on question number 4. How can mothers set healthy boundaries while still showing love and grace?
I mean, this was one of my favorite questions. And it's because I like to, like Sister Nodella said, I think this is a learning space for me as well. And so I know one of my struggles in the community, even though I do see my mother as a great communicator, I think one of our struggles was we struggled with where there was a moment to listen, and that sometimes you just needed a sounding board. You weren't necessarily looking for instructions 1 through 10 on what to do. And that's where we struggled, because I think automatically she was ready to tell me the things that you need to do, or just kind of suggest them in a really great way. But because I was older, I have my own way of thinking. I have my own ideas. So I'm just kind of venting. I'm just trying to let off my steam of what's going on and how frustrated I am, but I'm not necessarily asking for you to tell me what to do. And I think I try to set those kind of boundaries with my daughter, where I'm not trying to tell you what to do. Tell me what's going on. And I start from that standpoint and actually my mother and I developed a piece in our conversation where we literally ask, is this something that you are asking me for advice on, or are you just needing to vent a little bit? And that we make that distinction, and then we know from there which way the conversation would go. Because without that, we were noticing that it got all jumbled up, and somebody was in their feelings because you gave too much and I wasn't really asking you what to do. Because when you get older, you feel like you don't want anybody telling you what to do. You just want to talk and then figure it out for yourself, sometimes by the conversation. So we actually made that distinct boundary in our conversations before we really got started. After, hey, how you doing? And if I say I got something on my mind, but I'm just venting right now, and I'm reaching out, she knew from there where to go with it. And so because I learned that in my communication with my mother, grown, my daughter and I try to do that same thing with her, where if she says, well, Ma, I was thinking to do it. Okay, well, how did you come up with that? We might talk that way. Or, so what was your thought process on where you want this to go? So those are the kind of questions that I would ask with her, so that it doesn't come off like, teacher student. I'm telling you what to do. You need to do this, answer these 10 questions, get it back to me, and you better do it right, or I'm going to give you a grade on it. Because I think that's how they envision it when they talk to you as a parent. And so I tried to set those kind of healthy boundaries. I hope I did a good job with it. She's very independent in that respect, but she does still, if she questions what she's doing, because a lot of times she makes up her mind and she just tells me. But if she questions it, I'm open to, let's talk about it. Let's talk it through. And I can either confirm or just say, well, I wouldn't. We've even run into situations, to be honest with you, where she decided on something that I wouldn't have done it that way. But I still tried to share with her, that's not the way I would have done it, but okay, I see where you're going with this, and just let her know that I'm there to support you. Our decisions don't have to be the same in order for this to work.
So my daughter is a little bit older than Dr. Lisa's daughter, but pretty much this is how my daughter and my relationship is now. And again, even as recent as last night, my daughter called. And one of the things that I've learned is I look for telltale signs, what kind of phone call this is, before she even really say anything outside of, hey, Ma. I'm like, hey, honey bunny, I can hear the tone. I discern the tone. And I'm like, okay, I think I know what kind of call this is. And so she, began to chit chat last night. At first, we was just kind of, checking in on each other. She was asking me about, what I'm about to go through. And so we was talking, but my ear is discerning something different, even though she was checking on me and I was checking with her. And so to Dr. Lisa's point is, so we pivoted, the conversation pivoted. So I'm like, okay, what are we going to be talking about? And she began to share what was on her mind. And one thing that I started practicing is go in listening mode first with discernment. Go in listening mode first with discernment. And that will tell you where to go. Even sometimes they may be asking for advice, but not asking for advice, if that makes any sense. Hopefully one of y'all or both of you know what I'm saying, because sometimes they want advice, but they know who we are as their mom, right? So they might be a little hesitant. I do need your advice, but then it's kind of like, I'm not sure what her response is going to be. And so again, I really just, at this stage and age of my life, I really, like I said, I use discernment and I tap into Holy Spirit. If she's really looking for an answer, I'm like, okay, what do I say? Because I don't want to just always talk from my experience, right? I want to give her the answer that she needs. And talking solely from my experience all the time, that's not something that she always needs. And, you know, even as Coach has shared before, it's great to share your experience, but what else are you giving them? Does it bring them any kind of an answer? Does it bring them closure, clarity, or whatever it is that they need? So I am also, in terms of boundaries, I'm careful not to always, and actually very rarely do I share my personal experience, only because my experience was for me and at that time. And I recognize my daughter is in a whole different world. You know, she's a millennial. And so they do things differently. They look at things differently. And so I keep those things at the heart of whenever we have any kind of conversation, for the most part, where I think me giving any kind of advice or counsel may come in. So those are my boundaries, is not to use too much of my own experiences, even if I came out on top, if you will. Just recognizing we're two different generations. They do things totally differently. And what worked for me, more than likely it may not work for her, you know. So though, that's how I operate.
Thank you, ladies. And we do have a comment in the chat that I wanted to bring up, and I just wanted to add to this as well. I think one of the things that helped me with boundaries, right, is that when I learned that my daughter is now my sister in Christ, right? And so, as Ms. Nodella said, I can't give you my experience, but I can share with you, point you back to the Word of God if you have something that's coming up. And I know that the transition was not as easy, right? To not, see her as being under my authority, but now under God's authority, and we're both under God's authority, right? But to make sure that I am giving her the instructions, not my opinion, not my experience, but this is what the Word of God says. Now it's up to you to figure out what the instructions that He's giving you as a daughter of God, right? So to not, it took me some time to not see her as just as only my daughter, but also my sister, right? To be able to come and give her advice. And I think some of the boundaries that I set, because there's some decisions that she makes, and also my son, that they know instructions, because we talk about these as adults. And I tell them, well, you have a relationship with God as well. I'm going to be praying with you on this, but you remember, this is what the Word of God says. Now it's up to you to line up with that. And so those are some of the things, the boundaries that I set. So you can't come to me and talk to me about certain things that you know that I don't agree with, and they won't, because the first thing I'm going to do is say, well, this is what the Word of God says. Are you lined up with that? And so if I say that to them, they don't want to come to me and ask me these questions. But then sometimes they do, and I'm talking about my daughter mainly. Sometimes she does, but I still have to give her those instructions in love, because I still, I love her, and we are in this relationship where where we're both believers, and she's my daughter, but she's also not under my authority. I have to give her instructions from what the Word of God said. So I think that's how I begin to learn to set my boundaries, because as I learned that, then I know it was more healthier for me, because there's a time sometimes when mothers can overmother and you're still trying to give your adult children instructions, and they're resentful because of that. I'm grown. I can do it the way I want to do it. You know, like you had your opportunity to teach them and to raise them up and give them this insight. So you can't go and do that over again. So now you have to transition to being that sister, or that advisor, or that mentor, and just tell them the truth, because it doesn't matter about what past experiences that we had. The most important thing is this is what God says pertaining to our life now, and that has never changed. And it's something you're going to have to understand and learn for yourself, yet always being there as well. And even if it's uncomfortable to have those conversations, we still have to have them. So, and I've had that, experience with not only my daughter, but other young women, right? If you're doing something wrong, I'm not going to agree with what you're doing because it's wrong. So,
can I say something with because I saw his divine appointment in the chat was talking about gentle parenting, which I never understood gentle parenting. I am not one of those that would have ever been a fan of gentle parenting, but to what you all were talking about, I couldn't make that decision for my daughter now that she's married with a child. So when she comes to me and she says, well, yeah, we're going to start the gentle parenting thing because of XYZ. Although I might have cringed because I was like, what is that? What does that mean? Because for me, my definition for gentle parenting was, I don't know. I just felt like the children were running amok. They're just all over the place. And you're not, I think Coach said something about setting boundaries and things like that. And I was like, that's not how, in my eyes, that's not how we do this. This is not what I've learned. It's not how I grew up. But at the same token, I had to sit back and let her learn by trying this gentle parenting. Now, did I think, oh, this is not going to work? And also thinking that when you bring him over here, there will be no gentle parenting when you leave him with me. But we had to work through that because I also had to know my role in that space is that's not my child, that's my grandson. And although I raise my children a certain way, I can't now tell her how she's supposed to do it. I might have my own feelings about it, but I had to watch it. Now, I think she changed her understanding of gentle parenting, but she had to experience it or try it or whatever, because as a millennial, they got to try that stuff, because I was like, y'all label everything like gentle parenting. Who came up with that? So we laugh and joke about it, but now I can see her shift in how she raises him has changed. And now I wouldn't say she's gentle parenting. I think we don't do everything the same, but she learned for herself. And I had to sit in that seat that we talked about earlier and just kind of watch and hope that she didn't hang on to that, because I am so not a fan.
So I want to share just quickly that with the terminology that they're using today, gentle parenting, believe it or not, that's nothing new. And the reason why I say it's not new, so my two sons are technically my biological nephews who I adopted. You won't be able to tell the difference that they're not, because they look just like me, because me and their mom, everybody used to think we was twins. But when I got them transitioning from a girl to two boys at the same time, listen, it literally almost turned my world upside down. So their school tried to label them as having ADHD or ADD, which did not go over well. So they suggested that I go to the Yale Child Conduct Clinic. And because I never had boys before, I was open to it. I said, you know what? Let me see what they have to talk about. And honestly, and I'm sharing this because for those of you who believe, when you hear the word child conduct clinic, a lot of, especially our folk, we immediately, just go get that switch and that'll do. No. I had to learn with them. I had to learn a different type of parenting. Like I said, my daughter really was not a problem child, just every now and again. But with the boys, it was totally different. And I wanted to be successful with them. So I agreed to go to the clinic. Although I did not agree with a lot of things they said, but there were things I did agree with. And those things are in the vein of gentle parenting. So one of the things was, they was like, instead of physically chastising them, what about trying a timeout? I was like on the fence. I said, you know what? I've never done it before, so let's try it. The other thing that, one other thing, and again, just quickly, that we learned is I created this chart because they will come in and just drop their coats right there in front of the door. But guess what? Where did they learn that from? At the time I was married. So they was following his example. So I created this chart where they could earn stars, which at the end of the week, they would get a reward. So I'm just sharing this in terms of gentle parenting. That's actually been around. They just came up with a new description for it because a lot of people was rejecting the old terminology. And I just want to encourage those of you who are still parenting to please be open. Again, I took what would work for us, and the rest I dismissed it. You cannot dismiss everything simply because it's foreign, because it's coming from a different ethnicity community. Y'all get what I'm saying? Like I said, I found some good things. And let me tell you, the things that worked, they worked. And I worked them things until the wheels fell off, or until they got older. So I'm just sharing that with y'all, is be open and know what works for you. And now, again, 2 boys, they're 2 years apart, but I had to work with each of them differently. One was a tough cookie like me. The other was a little, you could just give him the look and he'd be about ready to fall apart. So when we talk about gentle parenting, we have to know, if you have more than one child, especially, you have to learn what works for one and what works for others. So many times we try to do an all-in-one or one size fit all, and you cannot do that. Even with twins, triplets, quads, and all that, you will still find individual personalities, and we gotta break ourselves out of trying, just because you're the same parent, but you're still dealing with multiple personalities. And honestly, that's how I made it through as well as I did with 3 children.
Thank you for adding that, Ms. Nodella. Thank you. Because when I was thinking about, we always say that when we're parents, my children are like 4 years apart and then 7 years apart, that each child gets a different version of us, right? And then when you think about from the children, I remember there were 7 of us. So my mom said each of us had different personalities, each of us. So she's one person dealing with all these different personalities and how she has to interact with them. So it is something, for us to be mindful of.
I was just going to let Sister Nodella know too, that one of the things she suggested ain't on the gentle parenting list. So I think it's all in how we define gentle parenting as well, because some of that stuff is not even gentle parenting. It was just parenting. But I noticed, forgive me, millennials, but sometimes millennials will name things. I talked about the tummy time, and I was like, what is that? But it used to be when you put the baby on the floor and they practice lifting their head up. We didn't name it, but that's what they named it. So I had to adjust to some of the lingo and things like that. And yeah, you're right, because even with my children being 9 years apart, you're not even talking about just between having a son and a daughter, but even generationally speaking, you're in a whole nother generation when you talk about a millennial, and then you go to Gen Z. That's a whole nother can. and you're like, wait a minute, I didn't even see this with this one. So you got to adjust on so many levels, which is why I agree with you to stay open, because I don't know what the method is to the madness. We just have to adjust and yell out plot twist often. That's all I say.
I think I would add to this is that I seen in the chat that parenting is parenting. Someone said, I think His Divine Appointment, and that we have instructions to parent. I think Empower Perspective said that okay, and so it says parenting is parenting. When you put a handle gentle, we're adding a new perspective. And there was another comment that Empower Perspective said that the Bible is undefeated, so it gives us some instructions on how we are to teach our children, no matter how we want to do it. If we don't follow these instructions that were given to us, it can cause some undue stress for us as parents, because we are the ones who are supposed to guide them and give them instructions, right? And interact with them and teach them and lead them in the way that they should go. And so I agree with that wholeheartedly. And so I just wanted to say that, I'm thankful for everyone who was putting the comments in the chat and participating in this discussion. And I have enjoyed it so far. And I appreciate each and every one of us as panelists, our perspective and thoughts about parenting and some of our experiences that we've had when it comes to being, mothers, parents, to our children. So I wanted to say that, and I'm really, truly enjoying the conversation and also learning. I'm past the age where I'm going to be parenting, anybody. I'll be your grandma. I'll be your nana. I'll be your grandma. But I'm going to make sure that your mother has the instructions. If she comes to me, I'm going to talk to her as well. And I'm not going to overstep my boundaries and interfere with her parenting, right? I'm not going to do something. If my grandchildren call me, I'm like, well, do your mama know? What'd your mama say? That's the first thing I'm going to, because they call me. My grandson, he calls me. I say, well, what'd your mama say? Or my granddaughter, because that's important. We can't interfere with their parenting because we already had an opportunity. So those are some of the things that I make sure that I do. I don't overstep my boundaries, the boundaries or authority. He said there's another name, Nana. so yeah, so that's what they call me. So I'm really, really thankful for these conversations, right? Because it helps us to learn so much, that we are, and we have like maybe about 8 more minutes. So we have time for one more question, and then we're going to do our closing statements. Okay. So we got to question 5, and we had like 11 questions, I think 10, 11 questions. So do you guys want to do a part 2 on this? Raise your hands. No? Yes?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. We haven't got through it all. So we're going to probably do a part 2 on this because we have not got through half of the questions. But let's go ahead and unpack this particular question. So what practical steps can mothers take to prepare their daughters for the realities of life while maintaining biblical integrity?
Well, I'm gonna come out the gate a little strong on this one.
Okay.
This one, there's no negotiating. There's no gentling. I told my daughter straight up that if she decides to want to live a certain way, these are the consequences of it, and expect to live those consequences. I said, if you get arrested, do not call my number, okay?
Okay.
Lose my number. Don't call me. My daughter, going back to what we shared earlier about respect, my daughter know that I'm big on respect, not only receiving it, but I also give it as well. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I did is, outside of her telling me you get arrested, don't call me. And it may sound funny, but in the space of, if you say you're grown, right? We all say we grown. We all know as adults, when we make certain decisions, we know that there is consequences, especially when it's the wrong decision. So that's something that I taught all of them. Also being a youth director for, I think, nearly 15 years, that was something that I didn't hold back on, because to the point of gentle parenting, what does that really mean, or what does that mean for your household, right? So if your idea of gentle parenting means to skip all discipline, yeah, you're setting that child up to crash and burn. But I do believe in a measure of discipline that is appropriate for that particular behavior as a child. But as an adult, if I don't instill that in my children, they're going to make a lot of mistakes as an adult. And I can say humbly that all of my children, because again, I was very stern with them. I did it out of love, but I was very stern just to get my point across to them, because I saw my daughter is a millennial. I saw, and her brothers, and I saw where that generation was going, that the discipline was missing. And I'm not talking about the physical discipline. That's not always the answer. I'm just talking about even correction or verbal chastisement, redirecting, right? Because I gave them that foundation, I've never had to bail it, because I told the boys too, I've never had to bail anybody out of jail. A couple of times I had to go to school, but it wasn't a regular thing. Why? Because I implemented, there were some non-negotiables. And again, whatever your actions were, prepare to accept the consequences and not expect for me to bail you out. So, in the vein of what are some practical steps can mothers take to prepare their daughters for the realities of life? I told every last one of them, as well as my grandchildren, nobody owes you nothing, and nobody is obligated to give you anything. When a person does something nice for you, don't take it for granted. Count it as an honor and appreciate it, because they did not have to do anything for you. So I'll just say that's the other. Those are my two practical steps: is don't call me if you get locked up because you was out there doing something you had no business doing. But don't think that people owe you anything. I know scripturally the Bible says the only thing we owe each other is to love each other. That's about the only thing. But anything else, when somebody does anything for you, they're not obligated. They are doing it out of the kindness of their heart, and you don't ever want to burn that bridge either.
Yeah, I mean, that was as direct as you can get it, Sister Nodella. I mean, I think I call it old school, but that's kind of like how I received it when I was young, and how I shared with my children as they grew up, that you have to deal with the consequences of your decisions. And ultimately you are in control of that. I can tell you XYZ and you can decide to do ABC. And whatever happens from that decision, whether you knew better or not, you're gonna have that's yours. And I try to, even now in conversations, I remind them of things that happen, because we do separate ourselves from the consequences of things. Often we see it and we just kind of separate ourselves from it. But I remind them, even the smallest of things that you think, oh, it's no big deal. Oh, I didn't do this. Oh, that's no big deal. I just remind them that there are consequences, that they're out there. So when it happens, it's not like that this is the first time that you're hearing this. It's not the first time you're like, oh my goodness. So I try to take away some of those oh my goodnesses. So so when it happens, the discussion will be very different. It's not like brand new. It's like, okay, well, I knew this was coming, and then prepare for it. So I love what you were saying, because I don't think it comes more direct than that. You reap what you sow, kind of thing. You go out there and do your business. then the consequences of. We've all had to deal with it, you know, having children before we were married and all of these things. And you have to deal with these things. I had to deal with them. You just, you know, you try to make them as ready as they can be, but there's no way to know. There's no way to know. And just support, I would say, you know, I would support, but not in a way. I remember when Sister Notella said something about not answering the phone. I've heard that so many times, where it's like, don't call me, okay? And people think it's harsh. I know my children are kind of like, that is really harsh. But some things they won't get till they have their own children or they're responsible for somebody, and then it kicks in. So that's when we get back in that seat and we wait, watch and wait.
Miss Adrian, I'm putting a comment in the chat. Miss Adrian, you can put it up if you don't mind, Coach.
I was just gonna say that uh-oh.
I'm gonna read it right quick for you.
I was just gonna say
let me read it right quick, Miss, before you make your comment. I just wanted to read the statement right quick before you make your comment. It says, there you go. If you earn the trip, enjoy the stay. I ain't coming. Let me know when you get back. We can sit down and talk about what did you learn on your vacation.
Hilarious.
As a little girl, I actually got to see that in action. My sister, who was born before me, she was 21 years older than me, took that trip, and my neighbors were so mad at my mother. And I remember them, I couldn't have been no more than probably 4 or 4. And I remember them coming to the door saying, now, Mary Dean, that don't make no sense. You got that girl down there and she by herself and you need to go get her out of there. And she looked at Mr. Sharp, was my next door neighbor, and she said, that was the best night's sleep I done gotten. I can't tell you how many years. And you want out, you go get her and close the door, okay? So I learned that lesson very early in life. She wasn't coming and she meant it, and I got to see it, okay? But when I read this question, thought about just going back over the relationship I had with my mother, 2 things came to mind: balance and demonstration, as far as practical steps. I say balance because one of the mistakes I think that my mother did make was sharing a little too much about her experiences at being a young wife, young bride. And some of the advice I got, I know now, was not the best advice, but that was all she knew to do. And I'm sure out of just love and concern for the growing pains of a newlywed and why he don't hear me, and I can't understand, and she just said, go berserk. That was the worst advice I could have gotten, because it irrevocably changed that relationship. But at the time, that was all she knew to do. And I would say also, with demonstration, when the scripture talks about honoring our mothers and fathers, the demonstration of honor should come from our parents, right? And so when you're communicating with your children, maybe refrain from using as much colorful language to demonstrate honor, to demonstrate disregard for someone's for their feelings, and when they're trying to explain that to you, at least having that listening ear, and also demonstrating the respect as well. So those are the 2 things that came to mind as far as preparing somebody for practical steps. I know they're foundational principles, but those are some of the 3 things that just kind of stuck out to me when you're talking about the realities of life, and using that in the biblical perspective is the demonstration, and then the balance of not sharing so much, teaching without necessarily sharing your own personal experience, because it can shift the paradigm of the relationship that your young daughter is currently having.
Thank you so much, ladies. Some of the things that I was thinking about, and I agree with what everyone is saying, right? Some things that I was thinking about was if you could put the question up one more time, if you don't mind. What practical steps can mothers take to prepare their daughters for the realities of life while maintaining biblical integrity? So I thought about the instructions we give them before they leave the nest to prepare their life, and mentoring them and teaching them how important it is for them to to pray and to have a relationship with God and to study the Word and to have conversations, ask questions if there's something you need to understand, because I'm here to advise and to mentor you as well. That relationship is never going to change. And I thought about also, maintaining biblical integrity. I thought about the first thing that came to mind was, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. So now you're going to have your own house. I'm going to have my own house. And the way you conduct yourself in your home is the way that you're going to conduct yourself in your home. If you decide to do it differently, just know that as for me and my house, we're going to continue to serve the Lord. So if the information that you're seeking from me is contrary to what you saw growing up, or I have expressed to you how I'm going to lead my life, then there is going to be some lack of communication, for other words. It takes me back to Mark, I think it's 3rd chapter, 28 through 33, that verse where Jesus is talking and they're stopping him and they're saying, hey, your mom and your brother, they're out here. And then he turns to the crowd that he's speaking to. He says, who is my mother and who is my brother? Those who are believers in Christ and who are walking in the same relationship that I am with my Father. And so it helps you to be mindful. It may sound harsh, but these are realities. And if you say that this is where you're going to stand on, this is the foundation you're going to stand on, and you're making a decision for you, and they make a decision for them, those are the boundaries and those are the realities that we are existing in. And so when I thought about this and maintaining biblical integrity, that's the thing that came to mind. And before we, do our final thoughts, you have anything to add to this question?
I just wanted to add to stand firm in your decisions. Even as a young parent, I had to stand firm in my decisions, even if, you're mad at first and then you're cool, before it's over with. If you had, if they want punishment and it was 2 weeks, stand firm in 2 weeks. If that's what it is, that's what it is. And I think a lot of times we kind of fall short and say, oh, okay, well, they did a couple of days, I'll let you slide. I was not that mom. Like a lot of times, because once I set something for what it was, I had to stand in that. If I told you, if you do this, you won't be able to do this, or go to the dance or whatever it was, even if, I got all the explanations in the world, I had to stand firm in that was what it was. So I didn't bend a lot in that respect, so that she would always know, Mom is just not talking. She really is going to do this, or, this is going to be the boundary if I do it. So set those boundaries, and as they say nowadays, stand 10 toes in it.
Stand 10 toes in. Well, I'm going to ask you, Dr. Lisa, if you can go ahead and start with your final thoughts to Ms. Adrian, then Ms. Nodella, and then myself. Thank you guys so much for staying with us a little bit longer. We're almost finished. Thank you again for all the comments in the chat and for all the value that you added to this conversation. And we thank you. We just want to make sure we say thank you.
Well, as every Saturday that we have this podcast, I learn something new each and every time. I have enjoyed this conversation, specifically about mothers and daughters. I think it's a conversation that we need to continue to have. And what I would say that I gained from this is that we have to understand and respect other people's perspectives, and other people includes your daughters. We all grow up, we learn things, we change, and just understand that as we progress from children to teenagers to adults, now married with our own children, grandchildren, that we are all changing and growing through that journey. And so we need to just respect one another's journey, and embrace your position, which means, we talked about this before, where at first you're teaching and you're guiding, and then you're just advising and you're counseling, but always be open and supportive. So I have really gained a lot, and this served as a reminder for me to continue to stand 10 toes in mine and allow my daughter to stand 10 toes in hers.
This is a really good conversation. I love getting the opportunity to sit with these ladies and learn so much about motherhood. And it really gave me an opportunity to reflect on being the daughter of a very, very strong and direct woman, but who I'm absolutely adored. And as I continue to grow and learn more about Christ and sifting through her imperfection of her humanity, understanding that some of the lessons that I were taught may not necessarily be exactly as it should be according to the word. But even in that, sifting through that and looking at myself, not just as her daughter, but looking at myself as his daughter and understanding what my role is when it comes to being a daughter of the Most High and understanding what is expected of me. I absolutely love these ladies and I love learning from them. So until next time, I love you with the love of Christ. There's nothing you can do about that.
I too enjoyed today's conversation. I personally can never get enough talking about a mother-daughter relationship or mother and son relationship, because I love all my children dearly. Yes, I was tough on them because I learned at a young age that this world can be very harsh, it can be cruel. And especially with my daughter, I did not want her to go out there and get crushed by society. We know today it's even worse than what it was when she was growing up. And so don't be afraid to add some toughness with that gentleness. As was shared, we have to learn a balance. And even though my children are grown and just about all of my grandchildren are grown, I still am in the presence of other young children. I have nieces and nephews, great nieces and nephews, and then just other children. And so it is still my desire to have an impact on their life and to help them as best as I can, not only through my experiences, but through the Word of God, through the leading of His Spirit, to help them better navigate an even more challenging day and time than when I was coming up, my daughter and my grandchildren. So again, what we share today, we shared from our experiences, we shared from our perspective. But know that all what we shared, I'm sure there's something in there that you can take. And even if you have to tweak it, because that's how I've learned, there's things I've learned from people, but I tweaked it and made it work for me. So don't be afraid to be firm, stern. And as Dr. Lisa said, stand 10 toes down, but also don't forget to add some of that gentleness, because sometimes that sternness can be mistaken for they don't love me. But all that we do, it is always through love. Thank you again for joining us, and be sure to join us again.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you. I have really thoroughly enjoyed this, just listening and learning even more about each of you. I thank God that that we had this opportunity, and every time I think about us doing these conversations, I think that they're going to be archived, and people from years to come are going to be able to see these and be able to take something from it. So I always want to make sure that when we're having these conversations, that we're adding some value for someone that can take away from it. And if I could leave anything with anyone, I would say that it's so important that you, as all the other ladies have said, stay firm in your belief. Stay firm in that, and to make sure that you are continuing to be the example, because that is what a lot of people are going to see. Sometimes they may not have a intimate or close relationship with you, but if you can continue to be that good example wherever you are, in the family environment, in the public, at work, wherever you are, if you can continue to be that example, I think that is going to serve everyone who is in our presence well. And I believe that it's so important to make sure that our Father is pleased, because all these ladies are my sisters, because we had the same father. So I'm so thankful to have this conversation with you. with them. You can and I'll land right there. I'm sorry. To Coach who's monitoring, who's handling this in the background. But thank you guys so much. Thank everyone who was doing the work in the background. We thank you so much, and we appreciate you. And until next time, we will see you, and you guys be blessed.